Okay, just fill out this form for me, said Mrs. Bear. You don't have many qualifications, do you? Apart from being strong, fast, and scary. That is, what kind of job did you have in mind? Actually, I think I need a complete career change, said Mr. Wolf. Terrific, said Mrs. Bear, peering at her computer. I'd like a challenge. Ah, here we are. This one is very different. Mrs. Bear sent him to the forest china shop, and the manager gave him the job. But the shop was full of delicate plates, bowls, and cups. Mr. Wolf didn't know his own strength, so he kept breaking things. When he picked them up, he did a lot of damage with his tail too. He was back at the forest job center long before the lunchtime. Not to worry, said Mrs. Bear. Now let me see. You enjoy running around the open air, don't you? Try this one. The next day, Mr. Wolf went to the forest post office, where they gave him a job delivering the post. This is more like it, he thought. But he raced round his route so fast that he upset the other postmen. They couldn't compete, and he said he was a show-off. Mr. Wolf trailed back to Mrs. Bear, his tail tucked between his legs. You are running out to be more of a challenge than I thought, said Mrs. Bear. But I am not giving up. Try this one. So next morning, Mr. Wolf went to the palace, where he was given a job as a royal servant. He was more nervous than ever now, but he was determined to do his best, and the things did not go too badly to begin with. Later that day, there was a royal banquet, and Mr. Wolf was almost run off his paws. Some of the guests weren't very nice. In fact, the ugly sisters and the wicked stepmother were so rude that he finally lost his temper. This time, Mr. Wolf didn't wait to be sacked. He went straight home to his family. That evening, Mr. Wolf looked down at his lovely cubs as they lay sleeping. He was really worried now. He wasn't making any money or bringing home any food, and soon the cupboard would be completely bare. At the forest job center the next day, Mrs. Bear was looking grim. Too strong, too fast, too scary, she said. I am sorry, but I'll have to admit defeat. I can't find you a job. Why don't you go back to what you used to do? Now, if you don't mind, I have got another appointment. Mr. Wolf left her office and stood in the shadows of the corridor. He was so miserable he barely noticed a couple going into Mrs. Bear's office. Then he heard something through the door that caught his attention, and he crept over to listen. We are really worried about our little ones, somebody was saying. I'm really worried about mine too, thought Mr. Wolf. He sneaked a peek around the door and saw that it was Mr. Pig talking. We still think of them as little even though they have left home. Last week was awful, said Mrs. Pig. It made us think it might be a good idea to hire somebody to keep an eye on them. What, like a sort of security guard? Said Mrs. Bear. I suppose so, said Mr. Pig. Somebody who knows all the tricks wolves get up to and who is strong, fast and scary enough to see them off. Goodness, what a coincidence, said Mrs. Bear. It would be a perfect job for somebody who wasn't earlier today. I'll send him round to you. Mr. Wolf smiled. Maybe there was hope after all. When Mr. and Mrs. Pig left, he stepped out of the shadows and slipped into Mr. Bear's office. Mrs. Bear did send him to see Mr. and Mrs. Pig, of course. Mr. Wolf had to disguise himself to get the job. Mr. and Mrs. Pig would never be hired. The big bad wolf, but a wolf in the sheep's clothing, well, that was a different matter. Mr. Wolf soon proved just how good he was at the new job too. On his very first day, he caught a young wolf trying to climb into the brick house through a half-open window. Mr. Wolf pounced swiftly and grabbed the intruder from behind. "Oh no, you don't, my lad," he growled in his scariest voice and sent the terrified young wolf packing. Mr. Wolf loved his job. He loved playing with the three little pigs and reading them stories. He had no trouble keeping his paws off them either. Mrs. Wolf had decided the wolf family should go vegetarian, and now they had plenty of money to buy the food they needed. The wolf cubs thrived. And so much to his surprise, Mr. Wolf really did live happily ever after.